What's happening, guys? I hope you're all well. So today we're going to go through a little bit of training theory, okay? So we're going to kind of just have a look at the argument that's going on in the fitness industry right now, okay? Because, you know, you've got one group saying stretch and squeeze, light weights, you know, you have to do this, you have to feel the muscle working, you have to feel tension, etc. Then you've got the other group that are saying lift heavy all the time, just do squats, bench, deadlifts, and you'll be fine. You just have to get stronger over time, and that's how you grow, and that's what everyone should do. So this group is saying everyone should stretch and squeeze and feel the muscle working all the time, and this group is saying everyone should lift heavy, okay? So both of them are wrong, all right? As always, the beauty lies right in the middle, okay? So if you can moderate your views and think rationally about both sides of the argument, it'll be very easy to understand why this group are saying some good things and this group are saying some good things, and that if you take away the good things from both, you're going to have a pretty solid approach to training. Okay, so let's think about what each group is actually saying. So this group is saying, the stretch and squeeze group are basing their kind of training efficacy off of neurological feedback. Okay, so we've got this stretch thing and we've got this squeeze thing, both of which are kind of amplified means of neurological feedback to the brain telling me that this exercise is doing something. So if I've got a muscle and I'm feeling it squeeze, you know, that feels effective. That tells my brain that that muscle is contracting, therefore that exercise seems good. Similarly, when we stretch a muscle, again, it's that perception, that neurological feedback to the brain that tells me that that muscle is doing something, it's in a position of stress, therefore that is good, okay? So they're kind of how they base, you know, or how they rate the efficacy of exercise, okay? Then this group are looking solely at the external load that we're using. So they're saying that, okay, it doesn't really matter about feeling the muscle, it matters how much weight you can lift once your technique is good, and then over time you increase that weight, okay? If you can take the good things from this side and the good things from this side, you'll have a pretty solid approach to training, as I already mentioned, because this group are right in saying that, yeah, we should be able to initiate tension in the muscle, and we should be able to kind of get a good stretch, getting the muscle into its length and range and into its shortened range where we feel that squeeze, but at different times and not during all exercises. And this group is saying that we shouldn't really need to feel the muscle work, and we should just lift as much weight as possible all of the time, which isn't always applicable either, because generally we need to actually supplement with some exercises that this group are really a big fan of if we wish to complete our muscular development. Because often this group tend to leave out some of the smaller muscle groups or tend to not work muscles through their full range. This group, they get good results. This group, they get good results, which is why they argue so much, because they're saying, oh, I done this, and this group are saying, I done this, and Dante done this for years, and then this group are like, oh yeah, but BPAC done this, and it's like, all right, chill out, right? Both those guys are massive, and if you take what both of them done and put it together, you'll have a beautiful approach, okay? Let's take a step back now, consider some of the stuff that actually underpins all this, because this is the important thing. You need to understand the why. If you understand the why behind exercise, then it doesn't even matter what these groups are saying, because you have your own opinion based on the science, the underpinning scientific principles, okay? So first thing we need to kind of understand, all right, you know, what even is muscular tension, okay? So we've got three types of muscular tension when we look at the tension that is developed during exercise. So this is your length tension relationship, okay? If you don't understand this, you need to go away and understand this, or listen very closely to me, okay? This underpins exercise. So the length tension relationship essentially means that a muscle is strongest in its mid-range, and then it's weaker at the extremes of the range, okay? So you'll have heard us discuss the concept of active range in the past. If you haven't, please check out that video. The active range is defined here, okay? So this is the muscle in its length and range. As you can see, the amount of tension it has the potential to develop is quite low. As the muscle begins to shorten into its mid-range, the tension peaks, so that's when we have the greatest potential for force production, okay? We can generate the most muscular tension. Then as we get into the lengthened range, what ends up happening is we get weaker again, okay? So the muscular tension that we're capable of producing decreases. But we've got this green line, which is passive tension, Okay, so when we move a joint beyond its active range of motion, we get this stretch on the actual structure of the muscle and the musculotendinous unit, and that increases the passive tension we can develop, because we don't need to actually do anything to actually generate it. It's just literally just pulling, like pulling on a rope. Okay, so we've got quite a bit left there. And then that purple line is the resultant. Okay, so you'll see that as far as you get towards the lengthened range, the active tension is equal to the total tension, and then the passive tension kicks in to increase that total tension towards the end. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. All right, so let's take a step back again and think, okay, what does that mean? What is this lengthened, this shortened thing? Okay, so we're starting small, and then we'll build it up towards the actual exercise stuff. So if we look here at this sarcomere, okay, so the sarcomere is the actual structural components of your muscle fibers. Okay, so the blue are the actin filaments. Just we'll call it the thin filament for now. Okay, there are far more proteins involved, but these are the thin filaments. Okay, so in the middle you've got this red thing, and that's your myosin. So that is the contractile or the thick filament involved in muscle contraction. So this red thing, it pulls the blue filament or the actin or thin filament in towards the center. Okay, so this orange line, the orange lines that I've drawn, are there to depict the amount of muscle shortening that is left. So the amount of potential that muscle has left for shortening. Because if you consider that from this red thing, there are these little myosin heads that are essentially pulling that thin filament in towards each other to produce the muscle shortening. So that's the muscle in its fully shortened range, and as you can see, it has no more potential to shorten. So the way I want you to kind of think about this is, alright, so in your lengthened range, imagine there's 3 people, we're standing in a line. Okay, in the lengthened range, we're standing across another 3 people. So I'm holding the hand of the last person in the other group. Okay, so if we pull at each other, only one of us, we've only got one hand linking the 2 groups. Okay, if we've only got one hand linking to the 2 groups, we don't have a whole pile of tension, and if we pull really hard, we're actually going to break apart. Okay, so we're not very strong. If 2 of us hold hands and we're pulling and we're trying to get to the next one, okay, we've got quite a bit of strength, and we're going to be able to get over to that next one because 2 of us are pulling on each other, and we've still got one person left to grab onto. If the 3 of us are all holding hands, we have nowhere left to pull. Okay, so because we have nowhere left to pull, we can't contract to produce force because there's nowhere left to go. Okay, because that muscle has fully shortened, so we've nowhere left to go. So try and think of that when you're thinking about this. So then we've got this mid-range, and as you can see, there's these, between the orange lines, you've got this potential for further shortening. Okay, so this means that it's like the 2 people holding the hands, we've got strength there to pull to the next person. Okay, so that's your mid-range of the muscle. So there's still a gap left for more pulling together. So the muscle is in its mid-range where the active tension is greatest. Okay, so that's starting to make sense. We're thinking of the 3 people, we're thinking we've got some potential left, and then we're at the top of the graph. Okay, then we've got this lengthened range. Okay, so when we're out in the lengthened range, as you can see, the myosin or the thick filament, this red thing here, it's at kind of the boundaries of where that actin or thin filament is. Okay, so it's at the boundaries there, so there's lots of potential for muscle shortening, but we don't have very many attachments. Okay, so there's very little overlap between the 2 to pull on, just like me pulling on that last person. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so that's why when we get back here, the graph starts to dip again. Okay, so the active tension that we're capable of producing starts to drop off again. Okay, so then we start to consider that in the context of exercise. So this shortened range, okay, this is going to produce the greatest neurological feedback. Okay, so when an exercise, when its tension is greatest in the shortened range, that is when it's going to produce the greatest neurological feedback. Okay, so when an exercise such as the lying hamstring curl, if that generates, or when you lock your hips down, you do your lying hamstring curl, shorten the hamstring fully, and the tension's peaking in that top position, you're going to get a lot of neurological feedback, and that exercise is going to feel really good on that muscle because you can feel it, that it's fully shortened. So that neurological feedback is sent to the brain, and then you think that exercise feels good, okay? So that's a good thing. We've overloaded that shortened range. That's not a bad thing by any means. But in the overall context of the program, it's not enough, because we just said that we have very small potential for force production in that range. Therefore, we're not maximizing the potential for force production via the muscle. So we can't maximize our growth, because if we want to maximize our growth, we need to maximize force production in each part of the range, in every single sarcomere across the muscle fiber. Okay? So then we look at the mid-range and we consider the deadlift, okay? So the mid-range is the range that is going to provide the least neurological feedback, okay? And this will make sense in a minute, okay? So when you do a deadlift, you can lift the most weight and you're using your hamstrings, it's a component of it, but they're never in their shortened or lengthened range, because at the bottom of the lift, if your knees were straight, then yeah, you'd be in the lengthened range and you'd feel a stretch down there, but you have your knee bent. So the tension in the hamstring is actually when you come up off the floor and you kind of get towards the top, but the muscle is in its mid-range then, and at the top it's not in its fully shortened range, because there's still more range left in the hamstring because the knee isn't bent. Therefore, that tension is peaking when the muscle is in its mid-range, meaning that we're producing the most force, which is good, but there's very little neurological feedback, because the muscle isn't getting a stretch and it isn't fully squeezed because it's not shortened. Therefore, this group, the pink dumbbell group, the stretch and squeeze group, would say that that's a bad exercise. Just like the heavy lifting group would say, oh, lying hamstring curl, that's stupid, there's no need for that, there's no need to squeeze. Okay, so both of them are kind of missing out on components, because the heavy lifting group have missed out on getting their hamstring into the fully shortened range and overloading that position, and the stretch and squeeze group have missed out on overloading the most important part of the range, that when it comes to actually overloading the range, okay? So then we look at this lengthened position. So for example, your Romanian deadlift or stiff leg deadlift, when the tension is peaking in the stretched position, or the seated leg curl. So again, your hips are bent over and your legs are straightening out, your knees are straightening out or extending, and then you feel that stretch in that top position. Okay, so when we think about that, again, we're getting that neurological feedback. Okay, so when we get into that stretch position, we get those signals from the brain, okay, to the brain that are telling us, okay, that muscle's in a stretch position, okay, the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon organs are kind of telling us, all right, that muscle is stretched, so that feels good. So the stretch and squeeze group, they like that exercise because they like feeling that stretch and getting that neurological feedback. That's not a bad thing, because again, they're working their muscle into its fully lengthened range. The heavy lifting group are still just like, no, deadlifts, okay? So I hope it's starting to make sense why both of these groups are kind of wrong, okay, and there are benefits to everything. Because as we can see again in that lengthened range, very small potential for actual muscle contraction, because there's very little room for overlap left. And again, when we go back to our length tension relationship, there's a small force production capability. Okay, so let's kind of put it all into context and wrap it up, because I know that may be a bit confusing, but so we've got this length tension relationship. We know that muscles are strongest in their mid-range, weakest in the lengthened and the shortened range, okay? We know that we want to maximize our force production capability in each part of the range if we wish to maximize our muscular development. Therefore, a program that was composed of all of those exercises with good technique would be a pretty solid program. But your heavy lifting group that only do deadlifts, they're missing out on some potential gains, and your stretch and squeeze group that are only doing the lying hamstring curls and the seated leg curls, for example, they're missing out on some potential gains as well, because they're not fully challenging the full range of the actual muscle. Okay, so again, the beauty lies in the middle. Okay, so mid-range, lengthen range, shorten range. Take a screenshot of those if you'd like, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense, because when you consider, okay, little potential for overlap is why the lengthen range is weak, Then you've got the mid-range, we've got decent potential for overlap, so we're stronger. And then the shortened range, we're fully contracted and we have no more potential for overlap. So again, we are weaker, okay? So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. If you got any further questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section and we'll kind of get through them. Because I know that can be a bit heavy if you've never been exposed to it before, but there are some good things to take away from that. And the basic take home point is that the stretch and squeeze group, they're wrong, and the heavy lifting group, they're also wrong. So get in the middle and take this as the golden rule of strength training, okay? Train the muscle through the different components of its range. That doesn't mean you have to do multiple exercises. Some exercises are satisfactory. Initiate the exercise with tension in the muscle. That's very important, okay? And that you're not just throwing the weight around. Use as much weight as you can possibly use while maintaining that good technique and in each of those ranges, okay? If you're using an exercise that is peaking its tension in the mid-range, such as the deadlift, don't be worrying about stretching and squeezing, because you're not going to feel the neurological feedback that you're actually trying to get from doing those things in an exercise that doesn't take you to peak tension in the shortened or lengthened range. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up there. As I said, any further questions, drop them down below, and yeah, hope you enjoyed that.